My name is Robert Cunningham, and for most of my life I believed that if you gave everything to your family, your time, your sweat, your money, they'd never let you down. But that illusion shattered the morning I stood alone at the airport, suitcase in hand, waiting for a flight I paid for, only to hear my son's voice on the phone say, "Dad, we're already on the plane. You're not coming." Behind him, my daughter-in-law giggled like it was a joke. That was the moment I realized I had given them everything, and they saw me as nothing. But they were about to learn a lesson no one ever forgets. Before we begin this story, I'd like to ask, where are you watching from and how old are you? Hit that subscribe button to Family Betrayal Unmasked so you won't miss the next chapter in stories that hit close to home. I remember gripping the handle of my old suitcase like it was the only thing keeping me upright. The leather was worn smooth from years of use. The seams frayed at the edges, but it was dependable, unlike the sun I was waiting for. The buzz of Portland International Airport filled the background flight announcements, echoing through the loudspeakers, the scent of burnt coffee from a nearby kiosk, and the constant shuffle of tired travelers dragging roller bags across polished floors. I checked my watch. 9:17 a.m., Liam should have been here by now. I'd booked the family trip to Hawaii months ago, planned every detail with care from the resort down to the airport transfers. It was supposed to be a gift, a chance to reconnect, to finally laugh together again. But as the seconds passed, unease settled deep in my gut. I told myself he was just running late, maybe caught in traffic, or maybe Olivia always fussing over her makeup had slowed him down. I was halfway through another excuse when my phone buzzed in my hand. Liam's name flashed on the screen. I felt a small wash of relief. "Hey, son," I said, pressing the phone to my ear. "I'm by the check-in desks. Where are you?" There was a pause. Too long. Then his voice came through flat and hollow. "Dad, we're already on the plane. You're not coming." At first I thought I'd misheard him. The terminal noise seemed to vanish, and for a moment it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I'm not coming. I paid for this trip." Another pause. Then in the background, Olivia's voice floated through, soaked in mockery. "Finally, a vacation without this old man." She laughed, a sharp, cutting sound that sliced deeper than any words could. My hand trembled. The phone nearly slipped from my grip. "Look, Dad," Liam said, his tone cold, rehearsed. "It's better this way. You'd slow us down. We'll talk when we're back." And just like that, the line went dead. I stood there in the middle of a bustling airport, invisible to the world around me. A grandfather. A father. A man discarded without hesitation. I stared at the black screen of my phone, then at the check-in desks, at the happy families boarding their flights, none of them mine. Rage pulsed in my chest, but beneath it was something worse: betrayal. I had given them everything. Raised Liam alone after his mother died. Paid for his college. Bought their first car. Helped them with the down payment on their house. And now I wasn't even worth a seat on a plane I'd paid for. I turned away from the gates, dragging my suitcase behind me. The wheels squeaked against the tile floor. No destination, just forward. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for sure. They would regret this. Every last bit of it. The rain had just started when I stepped outside the terminal, a thin drizzle brushing against my coat. It wasn't heavy, just enough to cling to your skin and remind you the world didn't care how shattered you felt. I stood beneath the airport overhang, staring out at a line of yellow taxis idling at the curb. Their engines hummed, their drivers leaning against doors, sharing idle words and coffee in foam cups. I raised a hand, and one peeled away from the line. The driver was wiry, maybe in his late 50s, with a silver beard and tired eyes. He tossed my suitcase in the trunk like it weighed nothing and opened the door for me. "Rough morning?" he asked casually as I slid into the back seat. I didn't answer, just shut the door and stared straight ahead. The faint scent of pine-scented air freshener mingled with something older like tobacco and worn leather. The cab pulled away from the curb and into the steady rhythm of traffic. For the first few minutes, I said nothing. My hands were clenched in my lap, white-knuckled and stiff. I could still hear Olivia's laugh echoing in my head, like a crow picking through what little pride I had left. "Where to?" the driver asked, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. His name tag read Frank. I cleared my throat, my voice low. "Home," I said. "Just take me home." Frank nodded and turned onto the highway. The city slid past us in a blur of grays and wet reflections, streetlights shimmering on the pavement. I watched the skyline disappear behind a veil of mist and drizzle each mile, putting distance between me and the life I thought I had. "You sure you're okay?" Frank asked after a while, not unkindly. "You look like someone just ran over your dog." I almost smiled. Almost. "Family stuff," I muttered. He gave a low whistle like he knew exactly what that meant. "Yeah, been there. You give everything and somehow it's still not enough." That landed harder than I expected. I turned my face to the window, but my reflection stared back lined gray eyes, hollowed by years of effort that apparently counted for nothing. I thought of Liam at 20 the first time he said, "Thanks, Dad. I'll pay you back someday." He never did. I thought of the wedding I funded, the house I helped buy, the endless bills I covered, all with the naive belief that loyalty would be returned. And now here I was, drenched in silence, cast aside like a broken umbrella after a storm. "You know," Frank continued, "my daughter sold the truck I gave her a month after she moved to Seattle. Didn't even tell me. That's how it goes sometimes. You give because you love, but love doesn't always bounce back." I didn't respond, but I felt something shift inside me, a hardening. He was right. I'd given because I loved, and now it was time to stop giving. I wasn't a charity. I wasn't a backup plan. I wasn't going to be humiliated and let it slide. I leaned back in the seat, the rain streaking the glass beside me, and watched the exit signs pass one by one. Let them laugh on that plane. Let them toast to a vacation without the old man. When they came home, they'd learn just how dangerous it is to underestimate someone who's got nothing left to lose. By the time we pulled into my driveway, the rain had slowed to a fine mist that clung to the windows like a second skin. Frank eased the taxi to a stop, his eyes catching mine in the rearview mirror. "That'll be $28.50, he said, his voice low and respectful. I handed him a crumpled 30, waving off the change. "Keep it." He nodded, not pushing the small talk any further. As I stepped out, the scent of wet earth hit me first, followed by the faint trace of lilacs from Elaine's garden next door. The familiar crackle of gravel underfoot welcomed me like an old song I didn't realize I missed. My suitcase thudded onto the porch, and I stood there a moment staring at the door I'd unlocked for them 1,000 times. I dug into my coat pocket, fingers brushing the cold metal of my keys, the same set Liam used to borrow when he'd forget his own. I opened the door and stepped inside. The house smelled like old coffee and furniture polish. Nothing out of place. Just still. Too still. I dropped my suitcase by the entryway, its presence oddly out of place now, like it didn't belong here anymore. I slipped off my coat and tossed it over the stair rail, my movements stiff from the chill outside. My knees popped with the familiar complaint of age as I crossed the living room. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it, the armchair angled toward the window, the bookshelf with framed photos I hadn't dared take down. I sank into the chair, its cushions sighing beneath me. The walls seemed to breathe with me in the silence. I looked toward the fireplace mantel and saw Liam's graduation photo him in that oversized cap and gown, smiling like he had the world in his pocket. My fingers twitched, wanting to knock it down, but I didn't move. I wasn't ready for rage. Not yet. The pain still came first. I thought about that morning, how I'd woken up early, packed, neatly checked, and rechecked the reservation, printed out the tickets, even brought a snack bag Olivia liked. I'd done all of it like a man who still believed he mattered to them. I was wrong. I rose slowly, my joints creaking, and made my way to the kitchen. The air felt colder here, emptier somehow. I flicked on the overhead light, and the familiar hum filled the room. My hand moved automatically to the coffee pot, pouring what remained from yesterday into a mug and heating it in the microwave. While it spun, I leaned against the counter, eyes fixed on the small bulletin board where I used to post reminders for Liam. Oil changes, dentist appointments, things he never paid attention to. He didn't need reminders anymore. He didn't need me. The microwave beeped. I pulled the mug out and wrapped my hands around it, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. I sipped, and the bitterness cut through the fog. I stood there in silence, watching steam curl into the air. They'd made their move. Now it was my turn. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the faint ticking of the clock on my dresser, marking the slow crawl of hours. Every creak of the house settled deeper into my chest. I'd lived in this home for 32 years. Every nail and crack in the wall had a story. I remembered painting Liam's room sky blue when he was 5 because he said he wanted to sleep under the clouds. I remembered installing the porch swing for his mother before she passed, and how Liam never once sat in it after she was gone. It wasn't just a house. It was a life. And I'd let them treat it like a free motel. Around 3 a.m., I got out of bed. My legs ached as I shuffled toward the small office off the hallway, a room I hadn't used much in the past few years. I flipped on the lamp and stood in the doorway, taking it all in the cluttered desk. The half-working printer, the folders I hadn't opened since before Liam's wedding. I pulled the old leather chair out and sat down slowly. The computer blinked to life with a soft whir, and I stared at the screen for a long while before opening my email. They were messages from the airline hotel confirmations receipts, all in my name. I clicked through each one and read every detail again. My name, my credit card, my kindness. All of it used to exclude me. I could picture them now reclining by the beach, fruity drinks in hand, pretending they'd earned it. Liam probably telling himself he deserved it for all the stress he'd been under at work. Olivia likely posting filtered photos with captions about family time, conveniently cropping me out of the story. I clenched my jaw. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was how casual it had been. How easy they'd made the decision. No warning, no explanation. Just a cold voice over the phone dismissing me like an afterthought. The man I was before that phone call, he was gone now. That version of me would have swallowed the pain, told himself they were just stressed, made excuses. That version would have welcomed them back with dinner and a smile. But that man had been left behind, at Gate 17, suitcase in hand, staring at nothing. I was someone else now. Someone who had to make peace with the fact that his only son had weighed him against a plane ticket and found him disposable. I pulled out a notepad from the desk drawer, the same kind I used to jot down grocery lists and car maintenance reminders. This time I wrote 3 words at the top in block letters: take it back. My time, my home, my dignity. I sat there until dawn, the sky outside shifting from black to soft gray. The birds started their morning calls, unaware that the world inside my walls had shifted. I rose from the chair, my knees stiff, my back sore, but my resolve steady. Today wouldn't be like yesterday. Not anymore. The morning sunlight slid across the hardwood floors like a slow-moving tide, casting long lines of gold and shadow through the blinds. I stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a fresh cup of coffee, the warmth doing little to melt the cold growing in my chest. I hadn't turned on the TV. I didn't want noise. What I needed was clarity. I moved to the living room and looked around, really looked. The furniture was old but solid. The rug had frayed edges, and the walls needed a new coat of paint, but every imperfection told a story. I'd built this life. I'd earned every inch of it. So how had I ended up letting people who disrespected me live here like it was theirs? I stared at the couch where Liam used to nap after school. I could still picture him there, teenage arms crossed, one sock hanging off his foot, muttering complaints about homework. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who didn't flinch at leaving me behind without a shred of remorse. I stepped over to the mantel and picked up a frame. Liam on his wedding day. Olivia in her overpriced gown, arm looped through his. I was smiling in the photo, standing beside them like a proud father. That day had cost me almost every cent of my retirement savings, and still Olivia had whispered afterward that the venue felt too cheap for her family. I set the frame down, but not back in its place. I turned it face down. Enough was enough. I went back into the office and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in years. Bank statements, account information, the will I'd drafted when Liam was still in college. Back when I still thought he'd honor my name. I sat down and started reading through every page. I wasn't sure yet what my next step would be, but I knew this much: Liam and Olivia were no longer going to live off of me while treating me like a burden. No more free rides, no more pretending. I took a sticky note and scribbled one line, pressed it to the top of the folder. Decide what stays. It wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming control over the years they'd taken from me. Control over the house, the finances, the peace that had slowly eroded with each passive-aggressive comment, each ignored phone call, each birthday forgotten. They thought I'd always be here waiting by the door with open arms and a soft heart. They were wrong. I stood up, walked to the front window, and pulled the curtain aside. Outside, the neighborhood looked unchanged. Kids playing on bikes, Elaine's garden blooming like always. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. This house wasn't a haven for ungrateful guests anymore. It was mine. And I'd make sure they never forgot it again. I turned from the window, picked up the phone, and scrolled to the contact I knew I needed. The bank. The time for thinking was over. It was time to act. I sat at my desk that afternoon, with the sun climbing over the roofline and casting streaks of warm light through the study window. The folder lay open in front of me, filled with years of paper trails. Statements, account summaries, receipts for things Liam promised he'd handle later. I stared at the numbers, line after line of transactions that told the real story of where my money had gone. It was all there. Olivia's designer handbags, plane tickets they never reimbursed, the new appliances installed in the house while I was out of town visiting an old friend. All of it charged to accounts that had my name at the top, and theirs tucked in as authorized users. I had never imagined I'd have to lock out my own son. But then again, I never imagined he'd look me in the eye and say, "You're not coming." That sentence had seared itself into my memory like a scar that wouldn't fade. I reached for the phone and dialed the number printed in bold on my bank statement. The call rang twice before a woman with a pleasant, clipped voice answered. "First Pacific Bank, this is Karen. How can I assist you today?" My throat felt tight, but I pushed through. Yes, this is Robert Cunningham. I need to make some changes to my account. Immediately. Of course, Mr. Cunningham, she replied smoothly. Can you verify your identity for me? I rattled off my social security digits, date of birth, and account number, each one grounding me a little more. She tapped away on her keyboard, the clicks faint but steady. Thank you. And what changes are we making today? I stared at the stack of papers, at Liam's name printed beside mine on the credit card accounts. I want to revoke access for my son Liam Cunningham and his wife Olivia. They're both listed as authorized users. I want that stopped. Today. There was a pause on the other end, professional but noticeable. Just to clarify, Mr. Cunningham, you're requesting permanent removal. Yes, I said, sharper than I meant to. Permanent. They are not to have access to anything I own going forward. Understood, she replied, her tone softening. I'll need a few more details to finalize the update. As she read off the verification questions, I answered each one automatically, my mind racing ahead. I pictured Liam and Olivia somewhere on a beach sipping overpriced cocktails while their room service bill climbed higher. I imagined them laughing, toasting to a father they thought they had under control. Karen's voice brought me back. All set, Mr. Cunningham. Liam and Olivia have been removed as authorized users. They'll no longer be able to access your funds or use any cards tied to your name. Would you like a confirmation email sent to your account? Yes, thank you, I said, letting out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. When the call ended, I stared down at the silent phone in my hand. I'd done it. For the first time in years, I had drawn a boundary. I stood, walked back to the kitchen, and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. This one tasted different, stronger, like the first sip of independence. Somewhere in Hawaii, a waiter was sliding a card across a white linen tablecloth and telling my son that his payment had been declined. I could see it in my mind so clearly it almost felt like a memory. Liam's smile, faltering his fingers, hesitating as he reached for the card again, his confidence dimming as the machine blinked red a second time. Olivia's voice would have sharpened instantly, her eyes narrowing as she leaned across the table, whispering accusations. What did you do, Liam? Did you forget to pay it off? He'd probably roll his eyes, frustrated, tapping the card harder against the reader, like force would change the result. But it wouldn't. Not this time. They had drained every bit of benefit from me thinking I'd just let them go on spending while treating me like a footnote. Now, for the first time in their perfectly curated lives, they were going to feel the discomfort of consequences. My phone buzzed against the table. I didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. Liam. Again. Another text, probably another voicemail, maybe a mix of both. I picked it up, stared at the glowing screen for a moment, then slid it face down. I wasn't ready to hear excuses. Not yet. Let them stew. Let them scramble to figure out how their vacation had turned into a crisis. Let them feel what it's like to have the rug pulled out from under you by someone you thought would always say yes. I walked to the front window and looked out over the quiet neighborhood. Elaine's porch light was still on, casting a soft glow across the tidy garden beds she kept with relentless devotion. Everything looked normal, undisturbed. The stillness made the storm I'd unleashed feel even more deliberate. I turned back to the living room and sat at the table where I'd laid out the banking documents. I'd already taken the first step. Now I needed to consider the rest. The house. The will. The access they thought they still had. Liam had always assumed the house would be his. I'd heard him say it in passing over the years, not even asking, just declaring it like a done deal. When you're ready to retire, Dad will probably renovate this place and rent it out. It'll be great passive income. as if I were a ghost already, as if the walls I painted and the floors I repaired were just a stepping stone in his investment plan. The thought turned my stomach. I'd once dreamed of handing it all down with pride. Now I couldn't stomach the idea of them walking these halls again. I rose and walked slowly into the hallway, each footstep heavy on the creaking floorboards. I paused outside the guest room, the one they had claimed as theirs, without ever asking. It was still neat, still exactly how Olivia had left it last week. Her hair straightener plugged in, a shopping bag tucked in the corner. I reached out and closed the door with a soft click. They were guests in this house, nothing more, and uninvited ones at that. The silence that followed was complete. Not lonely, not bitter, just final. I went back to the table, poured myself another cup of coffee, and let the steam rise around me like a curtain between what had been and what would come next. I sat by the fireplace that evening, watching the embers glow low beneath a bed of gray ash. The light flickered across the living room walls, dancing over the photos I hadn't yet taken down. I wasn't quite ready for that part. Not yet. One in particular caught my eye, Liam at age 10, holding up a fishing rod, the trout nearly half his size. His grin was crooked genuine, the kind that kids wear before the world teaches them to hide things behind politeness and charm. I remembered that day vividly. We'd spent hours by the lake, casting into silence, eating soggy sandwiches, and talking about nothing and everything. He'd told me he wanted to be an architect. He'd promised to build me a house someday, one with a wraparound porch and a reading nook with big windows. That boy, wherever he went, never made it past his teenage years. Somewhere along the way, Olivia came into the picture, and Liam changed. Not all at once. It was subtle. First fewer calls, then shorter visits, then excuses layered with just enough guilt to keep me quiet. Sorry, Dad works crazy. Olivia's parents want us to spend Thanksgiving with them this year. We'll come by next week, promise. But next week never came. And still, I kept showing up. Birthdays, anniversaries, dinners. I paid, they smiled, and I went home full of hope that it would mean something. I poked at the coals with the fire iron, sending up a few sparks. The logs shifted slightly, letting out a low groan as they settled. It felt symbolic. Even in the fire, things made their own kind of peace. The phone on the end table buzzed again. Another voicemail. I didn't need to listen. I already knew the script: anger, then desperation, then blame wrapped in a plea. I muted it. My eyes drifted to the front door. Tomorrow I'd start making real changes. New locks, new rules. And if they wanted to live here again, they'd have to learn what it meant to ask, not assume, not demand. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. The kettle on the stove hissed quietly as it warmed. I pulled down the chamomile tea, a habit I'd picked up in the early years after my wife passed. Something about the smell had always helped me sleep. Elaine had once called it retired man's bourbon. I smiled at the thought. Elaine. She'd check in soon, no doubt. She always did when something felt off. Somehow she could read it in my walk or the way I looked across the fence line. I appreciated that about her. She never pushed, just waited ready. I poured the hot water over the tea bag and watched the steam rise. The scent filled the kitchen like a small, quiet promise. I carried the mug back to the living room and sat in my armchair again, letting the warmth settle into my hands. Outside, the wind picked up, shaking the branches against the windows, but inside I felt still. They were thousands of miles away in paradise, completely unaware that the man they had discarded was no longer waiting. He was preparing. Piece by piece, I was taking back what they never truly deserved, and tomorrow they'd feel the first crack in their foundation. The locksmith arrived the next morning just after 9, a skinny man with thinning hair and a canvas toolbox that clattered with every step. He introduced himself as Pete. "You the one replacing locks?" he asked, glancing at the front door. I nodded. "Front and back," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "Make them solid." He gave a short whistle. "Someone get locked out," something like that. I replied, not offering more. Pete didn't push. He set to work quickly, the hum of his drill and the click of his tools filling the quiet house. I stood nearby, arms crossed, watching each screw come loose from the frame that had once welcomed my son without hesitation. The scent of metal dust mixed with oil and new brass as he unpacked the fresh locks. With every twist of his screwdriver, something inside me eased. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't spite. It was control. For the first time in years, I was reclaiming what I had lost. In small, invisible increments: respect, space, peace. While Pete worked, I went upstairs to the guest room. Their room. The bed was still unmade. Olivia's perfume lingered faintly in the air, sweet and artificial. I grabbed an empty set of moving boxes from the hall closet and began packing their things. Dresses that still had tags, shoes lined up in a neat row. Liam's smartwatch on the nightstand, the one I bought for his birthday, which he never bothered to thank me for. I moved with purpose, folding and wrapping, stacking and sealing. The room shrank as their presence disappeared into cardboard. I found a photo on the dresser. Liam and Olivia on a boat somewhere, drinks in hand, the sun behind them. I didn't hesitate. I dropped it face down in the last box and sealed it shut. Pete called up from downstairs. "All set, Mr. Cunningham." "You want to test the keys?" "Be right there," I said. I taped the final box and lifted it, feeling its weight settle into my arms like closure. I carried it downstairs and out onto the front lawn, stacking it neatly with the others. The grass was still damp from morning dew. I tucked a note beneath the top box's flap, 4 simple words, written in black ink. "You don't live here." I stepped back just as Pete emerged from the house, handing me a small key ring. "New locks are tight. No one's getting through unless you want them to." "That's the idea," I said, pocketing the keys. He gave me a quick nod, packed up his tools, and drove off. I stood alone in the yard, the boxes lined like a quiet boundary, the house behind me a fortress I was finally ready to defend. A breeze rustled through the trees, and I looked over to see Elaine on her porch, watching silently. She raised a mug in my direction. I raised the keys in return. No words needed. This wasn't just about shutting a door. It was about deciding who got to walk through it. Liam and Olivia had chosen their path the moment they left me standing alone at that airport. I had chosen mine the moment I refused to wait. The afternoon passed slowly. I sat at the kitchen table, the boxes still outside on the lawn where I'd left them, their edges now catching the light as the sun moved west. Every time I looked out the window and saw them, something in me settled a little deeper. It wasn't vindictive. It was necessary. I brewed another pot of coffee and opened the file folder I'd kept near the phone. The revised bank documents were there, along with a printout of the accounts, now stripped of Liam and Olivia's access. I had highlighted the changes in yellow. Simple. Final. I picked up a pen and wrote a new header across the top of a blank sheet, "Legal Next Steps." The words looked firm, grounded. The ink bled slightly into the paper like it wanted to take root. I'd always told myself I'd never be the kind of father who shut the door on his own son. But now I saw it clearly. It wasn't shutting a door. It was closing a chapter. A necessary one. I didn't owe them my silence or my sacrifice. I owed myself my peace. My phone buzzed again, a faint vibration against the wood table. "Liam." I let it ring. A minute later, another message. Olivia this time. I didn't listen. Instead, I turned to the living room where the soft light from the window brushed over the framed pictures still on the walls. I walked to each one, slowly pulling them down one by one. Not all of them, just the ones where I'd mistaken proximity for love. Pictures from holidays where I'd footed the bill and been left out of the frame emotionally. Birthdays where Liam looked bored and Olivia pretended to be grateful. I packed them carefully into a shoebox, not to destroy them, but to store them away. They no longer belonged in the spaces I walked daily. I wasn't erasing the past. I was acknowledging it for what it really was. I sat back in my armchair, the box at my feet, and exhaled long and slow. The air in the house felt different, not empty but open, like there was room again. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Elaine holding a small paper bag. Figured you hadn't eaten, she said, stepping in without waiting for permission. It's just chicken salad, nothing fancy. I offered a tired smile. Thanks. She set it down on the kitchen counter, her eyes scanning the living room, taking in the absence of the photos. She didn't ask. Just nodded slowly, like she understood more than I'd said. We sat together in the kitchen for a few minutes. No pressure, no talk, just two people who knew what silence could mean. When she left, she squeezed my shoulder gently. You're doing what you have to do. That takes guts. I watched her walk back across the street, her figure small but steady. The sun had begun to dip behind the rooftops. The house stood quiet, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. I glanced once more at the stack of documents on the counter. Tomorrow I'd make an appointment with my lawyer. I wasn't just reclaiming what was mine. I was rewriting what would come next. The next morning, I found myself sitting in the polished, wood-paneled office of my lawyer, Daniel Hargrove. The place hadn't changed in years. Same brass desk lamp, same worn leather chairs, same faint scent of pipe smoke and legal paper. Daniel was already there, his reading glasses perched low on his nose as he flipped through my folder. He looked up as I sat down, his expression neutral but alert. So, Robert, he began. You're certain about this removing Liam from the will entirely? I nodded, folding my hands in my lap. I've never been more certain of anything. He paused, pen hovering above the page. You want to talk about what brought this on? I shook my head. Just write it up. I want it official. All right, he said, jotting something down. We'll draft a new will. Liam Cunningham and Olivia Cunningham will be removed as beneficiaries. Do you have a new heir in mind? Not yet, I replied. Leave it blank for now. I'll decide later. Daniel didn't push. He was used to clients making hard choices. But still, he looked at me differently now, like he wasn't sure if I was acting out of grief or clarity. I didn't blame him. Even I hadn't known I was capable of this until a few days ago, but some betrayals rip out what softness you had left. What remained wasn't anger, it was stone. We'll need a witness, he said. I'll schedule the signing once the documents are ready. Shouldn't take more than a day. That's fine, I answered. Sooner is better. I stood and shook his hand, the folder tucked under my arm like a finished chapter. The weight of it felt strangely light. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard my name. Robert. I turned to see Elaine standing by the receptionist's desk, a paper coffee cup in hand, and a scarf tucked neatly around her neck. Her eyes brightened when she saw me. Didn't expect to see you here. I offered a tired smile. Just taking care of some business. Her gaze dropped briefly to the folder under my arm, then rose again, warm but sharp. Serious kind of business, huh? I shrugged. The kind that needs doing. She didn't ask more. You got time for coffee? She asked. There's a place across the street that does a decent scone. I hesitated, then nodded. Sure. The two of us stepped out into the cool morning air, crossing the street in silence. The cafe was quiet, filled with soft jazz and the smell of cinnamon. We settled into a small booth by the window, 2 mugs between us. She didn't push, didn't pry. Just sipped her drink and gave me space to fill the air when I was ready. And I did. Not all of it, not in detail, but enough. The betrayal, the airport, the locks. Her eyes narrowed, not with surprise, but with recognition. You gave them everything, she said. What did they give you? Not even a second thought, I said quietly. She nodded. Then you're doing the right thing. And just like that, I knew I was. I wasn't erasing Liam from my life. I was removing the fantasy I'd kept alive for too long. The fantasy that he'd eventually see me, appreciate me, come back to the boy who once ran beside a lake shouting, "Come on, Dad." That boy was gone. The man he became made sure of it. We left the cafe about an hour later, the morning sun now high enough to warm the tops of parked cars along the street. Elaine and I walked a few blocks together before parting ways. She gave my arm a light pat before turning toward the florist. Don't forget, she said, you're not alone in this. I watched her go, then made my way back to my car, the folder still tucked beneath my arm. The documents weren't signed yet, but the decision had already taken root. It wasn't just about cutting Liam out of the will. It was about taking back ownership of my story, of my name, of the legacy I had once built with pride, and watched them slowly erode. When I got home, I placed the folder on the kitchen counter and stood in the middle of the room listening. No footsteps above me. No Olivia talking too loudly on speakerphone. No Liam clanking beer bottles in the fridge. Just silence. My silence. I poured a glass of water and took it to the living room where the air felt clearer somehow. The shoebox with the family photos still sat beneath the coffee table. I reached under, opened it, and leafed through a few of the frames. One photo caught my eye. Liam at 16 standing beside me in the driveway, grinning as I handed him the keys to his first car. I'd worked overtime for 6 months straight to buy that car, skipping a long-awaited fishing trip and dipping into my own emergency fund. He hadn't looked back after pulling out of the driveway. That image used to make me proud. Now it reminded me of the first time I taught him he didn't have to earn anything to receive everything. I closed the box. The moment passed. Just then, the sound of tires crunching on gravel pulled me toward the window. A sleek black sedan idled at the end of my driveway. I didn't recognize the car, but I recognized the man who stepped out. Mason, Liam's old friend. The kind of friend who always wore too much cologne and smiled like he was doing you a favor. I stayed where I was watching as he adjusted the cuffs of his jacket and strutted toward the door like he belonged here. The doorbell rang. I didn't answer right away. I wanted him to feel the weight. When I finally opened it, I didn't step aside. "Robert," he said, flashing that practiced smile. "Mind if I come in?" "I do mind," I said evenly. "What do you want?" He glanced over his shoulder like he didn't want the neighbors to hear. "I think you know. Liam and Olivia, this whole mess with the cards, the house, look, they're stuck. They need help." "No," I said. "They want money. They need someone to clean up their mess." His smile thinned. "Come on, they're your family." "They stopped being that the moment they left me standing alone at that airport," I said. "You can tell them that." Mason stepped forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. Liam's got plans. You don't want to be on the wrong side of this." I stared at him, then leaned in. "Tell Liam he's already on the wrong side. Now get off my porch." Mason hesitated, his jaw tight. Then he turned and walked back to the car, his shoulders stiffer than when he arrived. I closed the door and locked it behind him. My hand lingered on the deadbolt. That man wasn't just a messenger. He was a warning, and I had just answered it. The sound of Mason's car peeling out of the driveway echoed down the street long after he was gone. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, my hand still resting on the lock. My heart was steady, not racing. There was no panic, no regret. Just confirmation. They really thought I'd fold the moment someone showed up to knock. They didn't send a letter. They didn't call and apologize. They sent a man in a leather jacket with a half smile and a veiled threat. That was all I needed to know. I turned back toward the living room, the weight of the conversation trailing behind me like a stubborn shadow. On the hallway table, I placed the keys. Pete had handed me the new keys, the ones that no longer opened the doors for Liam or Olivia. I pressed my palm against the table's edge, leaning into it, letting the wood press back into my bones like an anchor. I didn't owe them anything. Not another cent. Not another night beneath my roof. Not another second of peace stolen from me while they lived comfortably off the sweat that had long dried on my brow. I went upstairs to the guest room, their room. It still held the scent of Olivia's perfume and the crisp linen smell of the sheets I'd laundered for them just 2 weeks earlier. I had done it out of habit, out of duty. It would never happen again. I pulled the remaining boxes from the hallway closet and resumed what I had started packing. Every item they left behind became another stitch closed, another decision locked in. Liam's extra pair of sneakers, barely worn. Olivia's oversized cosmetic case full of brand names and careless spending. I packed them all neatly without anger. This wasn't revenge. This was accountability. This was what it looked like when a man stopped living under the illusion that family always meant loyalty. I carried the boxes down the stairs one by one and placed them alongside the rest on the front lawn. The stack had grown. It looked like a shipment ready for pickup. Only this one didn't have a return label. I pulled a Sharpie from the junk drawer in the kitchen and grabbed a note card. On it, I wrote, "Your things are outside. The locks have changed. Pick them up by tomorrow or they're gone." I slipped it beneath the top box flap, making sure it was visible. When I stepped back inside and closed the door behind me, something shifted. The air felt cleaner, sharper, like the house was breathing again after holding its breath for too long. I made my way to the study, sat at my desk, and opened my laptop. The screen lit up slowly, the quiet hum of the fan in the background. I pulled up the email from Daniel Hargrove, subject revised will for review. I clicked it open. There it was in black and white. Liam's name removed. Olivia's never mentioned. All that remained was mine. My signature would make it real. I stared at the screen for a long time, then pressed print. The paper slid out of the tray with finality. Tomorrow I would sign it. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers steepled beneath my chin. Let them rage. Let them scream. Let them send their messengers. I had spent a lifetime being the man who bent to keep the peace. But peace without respect isn't peace. It's surrender. And I wasn't surrendering anymore. I woke the next morning to a thin gray sky and the soft patter of rain against the kitchen windows. It was a slow rain, the kind that soaked everything quietly, no thunder, no drama, just persistence. I stood at the counter, coffee in hand, staring out into the yard. The boxes were still there, their cardboard darkening with moisture. Some corners had begun to sag, the ink on the note I'd left already bleeding at the edges. It didn't matter. The message had been sent. I wasn't cleaning it up for them. Not this time. After breakfast, I moved through the house like a man walking through a museum of his own mistakes. The worn recliner where Liam used to sprawl barking at the television while I quietly paid the electric bill. The hallway mirror Olivia once called hideous before asking me for help with a weekend spa package. I passed by these memories not with sadness, but with a cold kind of recognition. I had funded their comforts, not just with money, but with pieces of myself. My time, my energy, my silence. All so they could feel big while I became smaller in my own home. I stepped into the living room and glanced toward the fireplace mantel. One photograph remained not in a frame, but tucked in the corner a picture of me and Liam on his graduation day. His smile had once meant everything to me. Now I looked at it and wondered how long he'd been wearing that expression for everyone but me. I picked it up, studied it for a moment, then slipped it into the back of a drawer and closed it quietly. No ceremony, just closure. The doorbell rang just after noon. Not a sharp knock, but a buzz once then again quicker the second time. I already knew who it was. I opened the front door to find Liam and Olivia standing in the rain, their clothes damp, their luggage parked on the sidewalk like an accusation. Liam stepped forward, his jaw tight. "What the hell is this, Dad?" he asked, gesturing toward the soggy boxes. "You changed the locks?" Olivia stood beside him, arms crossed, mascara streaked slightly under her eyes. "You're really doing this after everything we've done for you?" The rage tried to rise, but I held it back. "Everything you've done for me?" I asked. "You mean letting me pay your mortgage while you mocked my furniture, taking my money for vacations I wasn't invited to?" Liam's eyes flashed. "We were just trying to have space." "You can't control everything, Dad." "I'm not trying to control you," I said calmly. "I'm trying to stop being controlled by you." Olivia stepped forward, voice dripping with disbelief. "We thought you'd come to your senses. You're seriously throwing us out, over what, a vacation?" "No," I replied. "Over years of disrespect. Over the way you've treated this house like a bank and me like a burden." Liam looked away, jaw clenched, water dripping from his collar. Olivia scoffed, turned sharply, and walked back to the car. Liam lingered a second longer. "You'll regret this," he muttered. I shook my head. "No, son. I regret not doing it sooner." He didn't answer. He followed Olivia down the walkway without looking back. I closed the door behind them and locked it, not out of fear, but finality. I turned and looked around the house. For the first time in years, it felt like it belonged to me again. The silence that followed their departure was a silence I hadn't known in years. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes from being unburdened. I sat back down in the armchair by the window, my hands still warm from turning the lock on the door, and watched their car disappear around the corner. The boxes were gone. I hadn't seen them carry them off, but they were no longer piled on the lawn. Whether they took them willingly or spitefully, I didn't care. That chapter was packed, soaked, and gone. The house, stripped of their noise, was quiet, but alive. I walked through it slowly, listening to the creak of floorboards that had grown used to being ignored. I paused by the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Liam used to press his fingers against the glass face when he was small, watching the pendulum swing like it held some secret power. I wound it now for the first time in months. Its low, steady ticking followed me into the kitchen. On the counter, the folder from Hargrove's office sat open. The will, my signature still missing. I stared at the line where my name would go. It didn't feel as heavy now. It felt right. I took a pen from the drawer, clicked it once, and wrote my name in firm, unwavering strokes. I'd thought that moment would hurt, but it didn't. It didn't feel like severing. It felt like sealing something that had been leaking for too long. After I signed it, I sealed the document in a new envelope and placed it back in the folder. I would return it to Daniel tomorrow. I made myself a sandwich, roast beef mustard, nothing fancy, and stood at the kitchen sink while I ate. Outside, the sky had cleared the rain, lifting like a veil to reveal a pale blue sky stretching over the neighborhood. The birds were louder now, or maybe I just hadn't been listening. I rinsed the plate, set it on the rack, and walked to the back porch. The air was damp but clean. I pulled out the wooden chair I hadn't used in years, the one I built with my own hands the summer after Liam left for college. I sat there stretching my legs and looked out over the yard. The grass was patchy, the hedges needed trimming, and the fence leaned slightly where a storm had pushed it last winter. But it was mine. Imperfect quiet, and completely mine. I heard the gate creak softly. Elaine's small terrier Max trotted up the walkway ahead of her. She followed with a slow, measured pace, a paper bag in one hand. "I figured you hadn't eaten properly in days," she said, lifting the bag like a peace offering. "Banana bread. Still warm." "You always bring the right things at the right time," I said. She handed me the bag, her eyes studying me for a moment. "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, I think I finally am." She sat in the chair next to mine. We didn't talk much after that. We just listened to the birds, to the wind in the trees, to the quiet hum of a house beginning to heal. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the next blow. I was just here, finally, still finally home. The next few days passed without interruption. No calls, no messages, not even a knock at the door. The silence was unexpected, not because I thought they would apologize, but because I thought they'd keep fighting. But maybe they were regrouping. Maybe they realized there was no more leverage. Whatever the reason, I didn't fill the gap with wondering. I filled it with movement. The guest room was empty now. I'd packed every trace of them, even the spare toothbrushes and half-used lotions Olivia had left behind. I stripped the bed, washed the sheets, and folded them tightly into the linen closet. I stood in the center of the room and looked around. It wasn't haunted anymore. It was just a room. I thought about turning it into a study or maybe a library. A place to sit and read, maybe put up a small table with a puzzle. Something mine. Something quiet. In the mornings, I returned to my walks, slow, deliberate loops around the block, with a travel mug in hand. Neighbors nodded. Some smiled. No one asked questions. They didn't need to. In a small neighborhood like ours, the boxes on the lawn, the changed locks, and the absence of Liam's car spoke loud enough. Elaine waved from her porch each time I passed. Sometimes she'd walk alongside me for a block or two, Max tugging at his leash, ears perked. She never brought up what happened unless I did. I liked that about her. The restraint, the respect. One morning she handed me a clipping from her garden, a sprig of rosemary, fragrant and earthy. "For the kitchen," she said. "Smells like a fresh start." I placed it in a small vase by the window, right where the sun hit mid-afternoon. It filled the room in a way that felt permanent. That afternoon, I found myself sorting through the garage. Old fishing gear, lawn tools, cardboard boxes labeled in fading Sharpie. In one box, I found Liam's old baseball glove and a cracked Polaroid of him at bat, his cap too big for his head, dirt on his cheek. I stared at it for a moment before placing it in a smaller box marked Keep. I wasn't throwing everything away. I was curating what was worth holding on to. Not the fantasy of a grateful son or the illusion of shared respect. Just the memories that felt true, untainted. The rest could rot in storage or disappear altogether. That night, I sat on the porch with a book in my lap, the air thick with the scent of cut grass and distant barbecue. Across the way, a family gathered on their lawn, laughter music, the clink of bottles and cutlery. For a second, it stung. Not because I wanted to be there, but because I used to imagine that kind of noise coming from inside my own house. I'd once thought my home would be the kind that grew into generations. Kids running down the hallway, grandchildren crowding the breakfast table. But now I realized that peace didn't have to come from noise. It could live in the quiet, too, in the soft rhythm of a rocking chair, in a house that no longer tolerated disrespect, in a name signed on a will that finally matched the truth of a man who had decided to stop being taken for granted. I was in the middle of repotting a stubborn peace lily when the phone rang. The old rotary-style landline sat on the kitchen counter, mostly quiet these days. Its shrill ring broke the silence like a stone tossed into still water. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked over. The screen flashed one name, Liam. I stared at it for 3 rings, 4, then picked up. I didn't speak first. I waited. "Dad," he said, and his voice was low, raw. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. "Not yet. I know things got out of hand. I just think maybe we should sit down. Fix this." There was no apology in his tone. No acknowledgement of the airport, the stolen trip, the months, years of silent expectation. Just that same thread of entitlement wrapped in a softer voice. "We're staying at a friend's place for now," he continued. "It's temporary. We figured you needed space, but Dad, we didn't think you'd actually do all this. The locks, the will, Olivia's—" He trailed off. I could hear the weight in his breath. "Look," he said finally. "I'm not saying we were perfect, but you're being cruel. You're cutting us out. We're family." I pressed my hand against the counter. "You're right, Liam," I said slowly. "We are family. And that used to mean something. But lately it's felt more like a contract I never signed." Silence on the other end. I could feel him trying to process a version of me he hadn't met before. "You left me at the airport," I continued, "with a suitcase I packed for a trip I paid for. And you didn't flinch. You didn't think twice. That wasn't a mistake, Liam. That was a message. It wasn't like that," he mumbled, but his voice faltered. "It was exactly like that," I said, firm now. "And this what I've done since it's not revenge. It's reality. You and Olivia have treated my support like a given, like oxygen. And now that it's gone, you're gasping." I let that sit for a moment. If you want to rebuild, that starts with truth, with humility. Not just showing up when the bank card stops working, or the locks change. I didn't wait for his response. I ended the call. I stood there for a while, the dial tone buzzing faintly, before I set the receiver back down. My hands were still stained with potting soil, and the lily sat half-settled on the counter. I picked it up and finished the job. I packed the soil around its roots with care, pressed it firm, and carried the pot to the windowsill. It looked better already, less wilted, more stable. I stared out the window. The sky was cloudless, a clean blue stretching over the rooftops. It reminded me of the lake from Liam's childhood, the one where he used to skip stones and chase minnows, back when his voice carried joy instead of manipulation. That boy might have grown into a man, but not the kind I recognized anymore. I rinsed my hands in the sink and looked around my kitchen. Simple, quiet. Every item where I wanted it. I had no idea what Liam would do next, but for once it didn't matter. I had already done what I needed. For me. The next day, I found myself back at the local hardware store, a list folded in my breast pocket, and a calm steadiness in my chest. The place smelled like fresh lumber and motor oil, comforting in a way I hadn't expected. I moved through the aisles with purpose. A new hose for the garden, a replacement porch light, nails for the sagging fence post I'd ignored too long. I wasn't fixing these things for Liam or Olivia. I wasn't making the house presentable for company. I was caring for it because it was mine. Solely, fully, quietly mine. As I waited in the checkout line, a familiar voice called from behind. Doing some home improvement, Elaine, with a small carton of paint samples tucked under her arm, smiled as she approached. Figured it's time I said, "This place has earned it." She nodded. "You look lighter." "I feel it," I replied. "Liam called yesterday." Her smile faded just slightly. "That go how you wanted?" "It went how it needed to," I said. "He asked me to fix things, but not once did he say, 'Sorry.'" Elaine sighed. "That's the thing about some people. They want reconciliation without responsibility." I nodded, setting my items on the counter. But I didn't bend. I told him the door only opens for honesty, not pressure. "Good," she said softly. "That's strength." After checking out, we walked together to our cars in silence. Before parting, she handed me a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Just open it later," she said with a wink. That evening, I stood in my kitchen holding the envelope, a mug of tea cooling beside me. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single photo, black and white. Me, Elaine, and a younger version of Max, her old terrier, on a neighborhood volunteer day from years ago. I'd forgotten the picture even existed. We were both laughing hands covered in dirt shovels resting on our shoulders. On the back in her handwriting, it read, "Before it all got heavy." I stood there staring at it for a while, unsure whether to smile or cry. Instead, I slid it into a small frame and placed it on the shelf beside the window. Not as a replacement for the family photos I'd put away, but as a reminder that life, real life, still existed beyond those who couldn't see my worth. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, the porch light casting a soft glow across the yard. I stepped out into the cool evening and sat on the steps, elbows resting on my knees, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. The breeze carried no voices, no raised tones, no tension. Just air, clean and passing. Max barked faintly from across the street. Elaine's silhouette moved behind her curtain. I sat there for a long time, not waiting for anything, not watching for a car to pull up or a son to apologize. Just sitting, existing, whole. I hadn't planned for my life to look like this. But now that I was here, I saw the beauty in it, not the beauty of noise and guests and holidays crammed into expectations, but the kind of beauty that rises from stillness. And I wasn't about to let anyone take that from me again. The following morning, I rose before the sun and made a simple breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee brewed just strong enough to wake the bones. I ate at the kitchen table with the window cracked open, the chill of dawn settling across my shoulders like an old wool coat. Outside, the neighborhood was still. No barking dogs, no passing cars. Just the slow, steady rhythm of a new day beginning. I liked it that way. After the dishes were washed and the counter wiped down, I pulled the will folder from the drawer and placed it in my bag. I had an appointment at Daniel Hargrove's office at 10 sharp to finalize and file the documents. There would be witnesses, signatures, official stamps. It would be done. Not out of vengeance, out of necessity. The ride to Daniel's office was quiet. No radio, no distractions. Just the sound of tires on asphalt and the ticking turn signal at each light. I arrived 10 minutes early. Daniel greeted me with a firm handshake and a fresh pot of coffee. "Looks like you're ready," he said, as he passed the documents across the desk. No second thoughts. "Not a one," I replied. He nodded. "Then let's make it official." I signed each page with deliberate strokes, no hesitation in my hand. A notary sat in, witnessed stamped, and nodded. "It's all done," Daniel said at last, sliding the final copy into a sealed envelope. "You can rest easy now." Rest. That word sat differently with me these days. It wasn't about escape anymore. It was about stillness earned. On the way home, I stopped by the grocery store, picked up a few things, flower apples, cinnamon. I hadn't baked a pie in years, but for some reason today felt like the right day. Something about the smell of cinnamon always felt like healing to me. I spent the afternoon in the kitchen peeling and slicing, mixing the dough with quiet care. My hands moved without rush, without purpose, beyond the act itself. It wasn't for a holiday. It wasn't for anyone. It was just for the house, for the man I used to be and the man I was becoming. As the pie baked, the scent filled every corner of the home. It seeped into the wood grain, into the curtains, into the space between the silence. It was the smell of something made with intention, something built from scratch. When the timer rang, I pulled the pie from the oven and set it on the counter to cool. Then I sat on the porch with a fresh cup of tea, the late afternoon sun stretching long shadows across the yard. Elaine wandered over a little while later, holding a bag of lemons from her tree. "You baking?" she asked, smiling. I could smell it from my kitchen. "Apple," I said. "Haven't made one since before Liam's wedding." She didn't speak for a moment, just stood beside me, her hand resting lightly on the porch railing. "You're doing good, Robert." I nodded. "Yeah. I finally feel like I'm living in my own house again." "Takes time," she said. "But once you reclaim your space, it stops echoing with what used to hurt." I looked out over the lawn, the repaired fence, the stacked firewood near the side gate. "It doesn't echo anymore," I said. "It holds." That evening, just before the sky turned to dusk, I opened the windows throughout the house. A soft breeze rolled in, carrying with it the scent of damp grass, fresh soil, and faint magnolia from the bush that had started blooming again near the side fence. The air moved through the rooms like a blessing, sweeping out the old and making space for something new. I walked through each room, slowly barefoot, each step connecting me to the floors I had once laid with my own hands. This home wasn't perfect. It was aging, worn in places, but it had been built with care, with effort. It deserved respect. And now, finally, it had it. I paused at the front window when I saw headlights pull into the cul-de-sac. My stomach didn't twist this time. I didn't freeze. I simply stood and watched as Liam's car came to a stop at the end of the street. He didn't pull into the driveway. He parked, turned off the engine, and sat still. After a minute, he stepped out alone. No Olivia. His shoulders were hunched, his movements unsure. He didn't carry anything. He didn't walk up. He just stood there on the sidewalk staring at the house, at the light pouring from the windows, at the front door he no longer had a key to. He raised his hand once like he might wave or maybe knock, but dropped it halfway. His mouth moved, maybe saying my name, maybe saying nothing at all. And then, without stepping forward, without making a scene, he turned and got back into the car. The engine turned over. The headlights swept across the street again. And then he was gone. I didn't move until the silence returned. No sorrow, no victory. Just the weight of something old finally crumbling on its own. I closed the window and walked back into the kitchen. The pie had cooled. I sliced a piece and placed it on a plate, steam still rising from the thick filling. I sat at the table across from an empty chair. I didn't picture who used to sit there. I didn't long for anyone to take the seat now. It was enough that it was empty, because I wasn't. I took a bite, sweet, warm, spiced with cinnamon, and let the moment settle deep into my bones. Later that night, I placed a single sticky note on the inside of the cupboard above the sink. I wrote just 4 words: Don't forget your peace. I closed the door gently and turned out the lights. Upstairs, the windows were still open, and the wind carried in the kind of quiet that doesn't come from absence, but from alignment. I lay in bed, the covers pulled up to my chest. Max barking faintly across the street, the stars barely visible through the half-drawn curtain. I didn't need them to guide me anymore. I had finally fully come home. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on. It's letting go of those who no longer value your presence. I spent too many years mistaking sacrifice for connection, thinking that if I gave enough, they'd remember who I was to them. But in the end, peace isn't something you beg for, it's something you build with boundaries. If you're a parent giving endlessly to children who only take, I hope my story reminds you that love does not require your silence, your home, or your dignity. You deserve to be respected while you're still here, not remembered with regret after you're gone. Have you ever experienced a moment where choosing yourself meant losing someone you once loved? What did that teach you? If this story meant something to you like it did for me, please subscribe, and share it. Sometimes closing the door is the first step to truly walking free. Thank you for listening.